Corey, welcome to the show today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
How are we doing today?
I'm great.
I was so excited about having you on the show. So recently, SEU Carolina started doing a lecture series where we give our professors, our adjuncts, an opportunity to talk about something that they're highly knowledgeable in. I had my 19th anniversary on the day you gave your lecture. And me and my wife were eating sushi at Asian Bistro. I hate that I missed your lecture, but it was a packed house. And I wanted to have you on the show today to give you a chance to talk about your lecture. For our listeners, maybe someone that missed the lecture, can you tell us tell us a little about what your lecture was about?
Of course. So my lecture was centered around my dissertation for my doctoral degree. So if anybody knows anything about dissertations, they are your culmination of a program. I went into my doctoral program with the idea of what I was going to write about already in hand. It wasn't something that I had to develop or become passionate about through my doctoral studies. It was a problem that the Lord had already showed me. And I wanted to get more education on it. I wanted to address the problem and work towards it. And so my dissertation is titled, "The Christian Witness is at Stake." And then, of course, the subtext is Southern Evangelicals and Their Resistance to Racial and Cultural Reconciliation. It's a lot of words to say the church has some issues, y'all. And so I spent several years reading, writing, researching, largely why the American church is so deeply segregated. So we all know the quote from Dr. King that Sunday morning at 11 a.m. is the most segregated hour of the week in America. Well, that was coined in the mid-1960s prior to his assassination. And of course, when I finished writing my dissertation in 2022, that number of percentage of the amount of segregated congregations in the United States was 86% of the congregations that meet regularly. 86% of them are monoethnic or overwhelmingly monoethnic. That means one ethnic group primarily represented in the congregation to the tune of less than 5% other in the congregation that meet with them. So if you have 100 people in your congregation, less than 5 of them are something other than the majority in the room.
Wow.
So
less than 5.
Less than 5. So in 2025, when I gave that lecture, unfortunately, that number has risen up to 87%.
So since you've completed your study,
yes,
the numbers have increased.
Yes, and there's a lot of factors that contribute to it. So I don't think any of us listening to the podcast or living in the United States of America don't recognize that we're in a deeply divided society.
Yeah,
and unfortunately, our churches are a microcosm of our society. So, so my doctoral degree is a doctor of business administration. So I have to look at things within businesses that make businesses operate, functional, change management and strategies to help them become better. So I chose the church as the organization and its problems that are contributed to by people. So since the organizations are made of people, that means that people can change, organizations can change. And to the point of my dissertation, the church is made of people. People can change, therefore the church can change.
Yeah.
And so the same people that are in society are the same people in our churches. And we bring what we hear, learn, love, live through in the world to the church. We create churches that are expressions of the culture outside that we all partake in. So to the point of businesses, businesses build employees, and we call that onboarding. In the church, we call that discipleship.
Yeah.
So the same methodologies and strategies that are used in the marketplace to build an effective employee are some of the same strategies that we can use in the church to build an effective disciple, right? So what you learn about your business, about your company, who you work for, the reason that the company was started, the owner's vision for this company, that can be acculturated to a person, an employee. Jesus has given us a mission, vision, values, and goals set forth all through Scripture. And we take those things. This is why we love the church. And we take those things to heart, and we continue to proliferate that message to other people. So we create disciples. That's the goal of Christian leaders. But some of us are ineffective in that, and we create disciples of culture, not so much disciples of Christ. And so the church looks more like an extension of culture as opposed to it being counterculture. So I looked at that problem, try to strategize some ways in which the church, mainly Christian leaders, can effectively disciple away from those things that are opposite, antithetical to the gospel and its mission.
Yeah.
And so that's what my dissertation is on, and that was what my lecture was on. That was a long answer, but a lot of stuff there.
No, that was great. That was great. So where did you complete your doctoral study?
Liberty University.
Gotcha. Did you have a good experience?
Define good.
How long was the program?
The program's only 3 years.
Only 3 years. I love you say it's only 3 years.
But
it's a day.
Well, when you defend a dissertation, that's the culmination of your work.
Yeah.
I had to defend my work prior to defending my dissertation because of, again, the culture that we live in. When you mention things like race and culture, unfortunately, in our society, those are red flags for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so when you were speaking about ways in which the church can become better, people's ears attune to it. However, it still doesn't change the things that have discipled people in the church, right? We're all informed by something. So it's in my dissertation, what informs us ultimately forms us. So the average Christian spends less than an hour a week in Christian formation, spiritual formation. Mm-hmm. And then we spend, I'll just use a round number, another 100 hours on social media, cable news, books, friends, workplace conversations. So what we consume, we always say, what you eat, you are what you eat, where you are what you eat. And you are what you consume. You are what you listen to. You are what you listen to. You are what you read all the time. You are what you converse about. And so we become extensions of that. My goal is to hopefully acculturate more people to want to dig into God's word and see the truths that are there and to create more effective disciples for the world around us.
One of the things that I thought was interesting about your lecture, and it really drawn me to be even more interested in to want to have you featured as a guest lecturer, is so you're addressing the effectiveness of the Christian witness. We're a Christian university, okay? So obviously I want our people our students to be, our graduates to be effective as it pertains to being a Christian witness. But then you had this caveat, and that was Southern Evangelicals and Their Resistance. And at that moment I got to thinking, I was like, well, wait a second. I'm a Southern Evangelical. We're in the South. We're in a Pentecostal movement, and this is a very introspective conversation that is causing us to look within. So it really made me all the more to want to have you come in, because I feel like one thing that we don't do well is look at ourselves and address what we see in the mirror. It's easy for us to look on the outside and to talk about how other denominations look, or how other churches do things, or that church up the road. But to look at yourself inwardly and to ask yourself, am I part of the problem? Am I creating an environment in which there is resistance? What is the church doing as it pertains to cultural and racial reconciliation? So I'm glad that we got you on campus in front of not just our students, but our church body and also our community, because I feel like it's a great message that a lot of people need to hear. Now, what inspired you? What inspired you to focus your doctoral work on the topic of racial and cultural reconciliation within the church? What's that point of inspiration?
Well, it came from several places. So I mentioned, and you mentioned earlier in the introduction, that I'm a school principal.
Okay.
And so we have a thriving international student population, and not all of our students, whether they're international or domestic students, are all saved. And so we have a lot of students that will live with a host family, and they'll come to our school and they'll go to church with the host family on the weekends. Well, since we're a Christian school, we have chapels every week. And inside of our chapels are the bulk of our student body. And our student body is extremely diverse, right? The host families that some of these students live with and the churches that they attend are completely opposite. Well, the question that came, that was one that began to make me look more introspectively at the church at large, was, Dr. G, at the time, Mr. G, do white Christians and black Christians worship the same God or the same Jesus? And I'm like, yeah, why? He said, because, well, when I come here, talking about chapel, it's like I see everybody. But when I go to church on Sunday, I only see white people. That's an outward view of an inward problem, right? So if people are wondering about our faith, the message that we say we believe in, the gospel that we say is the most life-changing message on the planet, but then we look at the representation of it, our largest billboard for change, which is our corporate gatherings weekly, where we get together, we worship, we fellowship, we care for one another, we pray for one another. If that expression is white people here, black people here, Asian people here, Hispanic people here, and then we all see each other at El Vallarta for lunch, but we have worshiped completely and totally separately the same God, that should draw a question as to why are we so comfortable in our segregation? Why are we so comfortable in our division? It has no one ever told us that we're segregated.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
How much of the segregation of today do you think is a holdover of the society that was created in the segregated South, and this is just what the norm is? This church has always been black. This church has always been white. This is, because especially in our communities, I mean, you're talking about churches that have been around for a long time.
Yes.
So how much would you attribute that to status quo, as opposed to, we're not wanting to be diverse?
Of course.
Does that make sense?
Of course. So ironically enough, there's the research and then there's my experience.
Okay.
The experience and the research are about neck and neck, meaning Barna, Lifeway Research, Smitana, all these guys did research over the past several decades, and they found that churches believe, they really only think about it when it's brought up, because it is one of those things that is status quo and is out of sight, out of mind. My experience is that these things are not done with nefarious intention.
Yeah.
Churches are not segregating by saying, we don't want you here.
Yeah.
That is not the heart at all.
Yeah.
But it is, well, we've always done it this way. And it's just how we are. So I grew up in Harrisburg, 10 minutes down the street from where we're recording today. The church I grew up in is completely and totally segregated. It is all black. Okay. And it was very easy to see when a white person visited the church, because it was one speck of salt walking through a sea of pepper. Okay. Right across the street is an all white church. Right. And it was very easy to see this one speck of pepper walk through a sea of salt. Yeah. Right. And I grew up with friends that attended all these churches in Harrisburg. Right. And we would visit each other's churches because we didn't live segregated lives. Yeah. We were friends together. We hung out together. We played sports together. We did band together. We were in each other's houses. We slept over at each other's homes. We did everything. We did life together, but just not on Sunday morning. It was not how we interacted. So I chose a single church, which is why it says Southern Evangelicals, because research has to be specific to then make assumptions larger, right? So I chose here because this is where I am. This is what I know, and this is what I had access to. And so I looked at the churches that are all up and down Harrisburg, and overwhelmingly, almost all of them, except for two, are considered segregated churches.
Interesting.
So, but as I spoke to the pastors and I spoke to the parishioners and I spoke to the people that comprised these churches, not a single one of them had any ill intention in their heart as to why their churches were the way they are, even though the society in the city that the church is in looks nothing like their church. So I couldn't put a number to it, although research has done so. But just from experience, if you look at the intention behind which you really can't quantify, it's not done with ill will. right? It's a result of what you said. It's a result of the history that has created our present, right? So churches were segregated in the 60s. Made sense. Society was segregated in the 60s. Well, as the world began to desegregate through legislation, right, the churches didn't change. Our workplaces did. Our schools did. Our neighborhoods did. But our churches remained the same. And now, 30, 40, 50 years later, the churches are the way that they are just by history, but not with the same motivation as what it was pre-1964, 1965. So it's unique. And when I brought it up to the people that I did interview, it was like a light bulb went off. Like, oh, I didn't realize. Well, now that we know, and now that it's been brought to your attention, what should we do? How now shall we live with the information that we have?
So this idea of calling the church to unity, okay, and having bodies of diversity. How would you define this image of biblical unity, especially in diverse congregations?
The American church has a real bad understanding of the idea of unity. When I hear churches and church leaders speak of unity, it feels as though they're speaking of agreement. I have a family of 4 children and 1 wife, and I can promise you the 6 of us in that house don't agree on a whole lot of things all the time, even though we're blood related. My idea of unity is the same idea that I see on the pages of Scripture.
Okay.
When Paul was speaking to the church at Ephesus, or Paul was talking to the churches in Corinth or in Galatia, he was writing to a people that were fractured because of societal influences. And these people had made a conscious choice to do life together because of something that they were all unified on. They were unified in the message of the cross. They understood that there was this Jesus that lived, died for their sins, rose again, and now it is our privilege to share this message with other people. But I don't have to eat what you eat. I don't have to drink what you drink. I don't have to wear what you wear. I don't have to live where you live. I don't have to do a lot of things that you do for us to be unified around that single ideal, right? I don't have to vote the way that you vote. We don't have to look the same. But when it comes to the core issue that connects our creation, our being, we agree. The willingness to do that is what I feel is missing. And I also feel that is missing from our formation of Christians in our churches. I don't think that that's a part of the conversation in our spiritual formation.
When you say formation, you mean in the way that we are discipling believers?
Correct.
So another question. So if it is not nefarious, having diversity in the body of the church, then where does the resistance come from? What is the obstacle that's preventing racial and cultural reconciliation from taking place?
That part is easy. So we are all informed by external circumstances, external influences.
Okay.
Right? So we have worldly influences and we have gospel-centered influences. Unfortunately, what informs a great deal of us in America is stuff that has nothing to do with the gospel, but that becomes part of our identity, right? So I'll speak very, very candidly and very, very plainly. So we are living in, again, the rise of segregation in our churches, in our communities, and a lot of what has divided us has been our allegiances to things that have nothing to do with the gospel. I'll name it politics. Okay. So politics create lots of identity for us, right?
Yeah.
It's where we find comfort. It's where we find connection with other people that think, feel, and act the way as we do. But what we have not done a great job of doing in that conversation is recognizing that there's a secular ideal that is attacking our sacred values. We have lots of influence from the world, but it is causing and wreaking havoc in our churches. And if we can't make that connection, I think it's going to be worse than what it is currently. You know how many thousands of churches have to be impacted for 1% value to rise, right? We have almost 400,000 churches, evangelical churches in the United States. And if 87% of those almost 400,000 are segregated, you know how many thousands had to change to move 1%? Right? It's a lot of folks.
It is.
It's a lot of people. But what has informed us and informs our views on others, what informs our views on people, what informs our views and our values is informing our churches. That's why we have so many churches dealing with, battling, and fighting the idea of Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism, in my view, is a natural byproduct of a lot of what we see in the world that is informing the church, as opposed to the church informing the world of who we are. We've had a lot of infiltration of information that has created who we are. And it's unfortunate, because instead of us being a credible witness to the world that Jesus is the greatest thing on the planet, we have aligned ourselves with political allegiances left and right. And that has become much more of our cultural, social, and religious identity.
I'm glad that you mentioned politics, which leads me to this next question as we dive deeper. How can the church navigate this conversation of reconciliation without it being misunderstood as political?
I think that's where it takes intentional and honest conversation, right? Because when we say the word diversity, there's a conversation in the world that's taking place about what diversity is.
Yeah.
And if we allow the world to continue to define the language that we use to speak with each other, we're going to constantly miss the point. We're going to constantly miss the point. So when I speak of diversity, I'm thinking of Genesis 1:26-27, that he created us, male and female, and those were purposefully designed by God. The languages that we speak, purposefully designed by God. The skin shades that we all bear, purposefully designed by God to create this beautiful cornucopia of people that represent his handiwork, his glory. Ephesians 3. I love Ephesians 3. Paul speaks about this mystery of the gospel that was revealed to him and not to anybody else prior, that we, his people, we show forth the manifold wisdom of God through his creation, right? So if God is using people, likes and unlikes, black and brown and white and tan and far east and over here and everybody, all these people to sing one song that Jesus is Lord, we are all declaring the lordship of Jesus Christ. If we're doing that all together in tandem, the enemy, our enemy of our soul, he will absolutely use anything to distract us and detract us from that message. So we have to be very, very careful to not allow the conversations that are being had in the world to inform and influence and infiltrate us in the church.
Probably one of the things that is frustrating for me. So I've spent my entire life in the church. There's never been a time, I mean, maybe in the 5th grade, like 1 year where I was a heathen, like blatantly disobedience, like
my testimony,
but I've spent my life in the church. Where I grew up, lived in a small town called Shelmerdine, and this place called Shelmerdine, one dirt road. My entire family, aunts and uncles, everybody lived on one road, and the church that was in my backyard was built by my family, and the whole family went to it. You got Aunt Lois on the piano, and you've got aunts and uncles, and everybody's doing everything. You know what I mean? It's like old school, like stained glass windows, tin roof. The pews were pink. Had the sign on the back of the church, you know, like visitors last week and tithe and offering, and you know what I mean, where you're sliding in the letters and numbers. Yeah. So that was my upbringing, and I feel like it's interesting to me because I feel like the church takes such a back seat to the things that the world is beating the drums over. I'll give you an example of just a few things. You take environmental issues, okay? Well, like Did God not create Adam and Eve and put them in the Garden of Eden and say that it is our responsibility to steward God's creation? But yet we associate that traditionally with leftist woke ideology on the left, and it's
the word woke didn't exist yet in the 70s, and the EPA was being introduced,
and it's that's a liberal agenda, and now you have this idea of diversity, and that's associated with a liberal agenda, and I feel like when you look at the gospel. And that how there is no Jew or Greek or Gentile or slave or free, like this is for all. And you have these gospel leaders breaking down barriers and instructing the church on how to do communion. Like it's diverse, and the diversity is beautiful. And this ecclesia, this church that is being formed, is this new thing that's outside of the construct of society and where they're telling us we should be and what we should and shouldn't be doing and how this should and shouldn't look. But yet, somewhere along the way, society started championing certain messages that the church should be championing.
Of course.
And I find it very interesting. It's almost like the enemy is focusing on the very thing, the very messages of truth. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's any surprise that the flag that champions homosexuality as a rainbow, because it's a very promise and blessing from God. That rainbow
the enemy's job has always been one thing: distort the truth, right? Not necessarily change the truth, not even hide the truth from you, just distort it, right? This is what I do say in my dissertation.
Okay.
Christian leaders have to be willing to challenge the epistemological framework of those that espouse things that don't make any sense to the gospel, right? We all hear it. Like I mentioned, Christian nationalism. I love my country. I'm a United States Marine Corps veteran, right? I love my country.
Semper Fi, baby.
But I love my Lord far more than I love any of that.
Yeah.
Right? And if I have to make a decision as to where my identity is going to rest,
so good.
It's going to rest in my faith.
Yeah.
I'm a proud black dude, right? But if I have to make a decision, now some people say, well, you got to be this. No. Hear me very, very clearly. Mm-hmm. We don't think deeply, nor do we speak with nuance about things. We look for sound bites and headlines. I can be all of these things. And I can absolutely compartmentalize all of these things about myself and put them on the back burner for the sake of the gospel, right? If it comes to a point where I have to make a decision as to whether I'm all of these things that we've given society an opportunity to label me, or if you give me an opportunity to label myself as a Christ follower, I'm choosing Christ follower every day. And the reason is because that is so much more important, not just because it's important, but because he died for me. Mm-hmm. Right. So if the gospel message is the most life-changing message on the planet, we ought to heed its call more so than the societal distractions and detractions from what our mission and our vision that has been set forth for all time. You said it earlier that the church follows societal trends. Mm-hmm. I said this in my dissertation, that there's no legislation to be written or law to be passed that will ever make the gospel more complete. Mm-hmm. And the idea that the church needs somebody in some office somewhere to do its job is foolishness to me, right? The gospel was the same gospel when the church was going through the Jim Crow era. The church was the same gospel
under the persecution of Nero. Like
exactly.
Same gospel.
And so when you see Paul leveraging these claims to people that hate each other to become this new nucleus of a family, Jesus said it. You love me more than you love your mother and your father, even so much so that it should feel like hatred, right? That we have given ourselves so much so to him and to his mission, to his vision, to his call. He ain't saying hate these folks.
Yeah.
But in comparison, if they don't know Christ, bro, I'm out.
Yeah.
You're my brother now.
Yeah.
Right? You're my family. Yeah. You're my family. And that sounds radical, but it shouldn't. I love Howard Thurman. When he wrote Jesus and the Disinherited, he made the analogy, not even really the analogy, it's just the truth, that Paul became so endeared to the Gentiles and the Gentiles became so endeared to Paul that both groups became traitors to their own families. That they looked as though they had betrayed the Jews and you have betrayed the Gentiles. Well, if you're not rocking for Christ and you're not rocking for Christ, we are the family now. This is the family. So if that has always been the example, why aren't we doing that? Right? Then our churches look the way that they do. Then you hear nonsense coming from the pulpits like we do. We hear nonsense on the radio like we do. And the church doesn't look like this loving, endearing other thing like it's supposed to be. In Pentecostal circles, we've always taken the verse of us being a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people, as speaking in tongues. I want to challenge that. I believe that the reason that verse of scripture is so powerful to me is that peculiar people do countercultural things for the sake of the gospel. And that does look weird when you see a bunch of people doing foolish stuff out here in the world, but then you got this collection of people that don't look like each other, have no reason to hang out with each other, have nothing in common other than the gospel, living, loving, choosing to do life together. That's peculiar to me.
Being transformed. Be
ye transformed. Like we butchered that scripture in Romans 12, right? Romans 12 is only powerful because of Romans 11 and 10 and 9. Paul is talking to people that are feeling high on themselves, the Jews, because we're heirs, right? He's like, but don't get it twisted. These Gentiles now are also made co-heirs of that same promise, right? So he made both groups unworthy. So that by himself, through himself, right, both groups can now have access. Therefore, brethren, I beseech thee by the mercies of God. Pardon the King James. That's how I learned it.
No, I love it. Yeah.
I beseech thee by the mercies of God, right?
I grew up on that in Sunday school.
You know what I'm saying? And so when you see this message of the gospel that is clearly laid out on the pages, and he's making a clarion call to people that hate each other, but they love Jesus. That's what being reconciled means. That's what living in reconciliation means. If we are to be ministers of the ministry of reconciliation, it ought to look like we are making a substantive effort to live, love, do life together in front of these people called the world, to show them a credible witness that Christ has changed us, man. Right? Like, that sounds radical. I know it shouldn't be.
So what are the dangers of ignoring this issue, especially as it pertains to our witness in the world? We're at a Christ-centered university. We've got the next generation of Christ followers that are going to be graduating and stepping into, the society of today with the challenge that it presents. What if we don't get this right? What are the dangers of ignoring this?
Scott McKnight says that getting the church right is so important. And he's not saying that just because it's something nice for the future, right? The church is God's calling card to show the reason why his son came to die, right? Changed people living a changed, transformed life for the sake of not themselves, right? So we have to be committed to that call, right? We have to be committed to speaking transformation, speaking and teaching changed life, right? We need to be evidently making effort to live the way that we say we believe, right? So come out from amongst them. That's my call, right? Come out from amongst the world. And also quit allowing the world to define who we are, what we should be, what language we can and can't use. So when I hear stuff in the world, DEI or diversity, equity, inclusion, for those of y'all that don't know, I'm like, again, there's no law to be passed, nor legislation to be written that's going to make the gospel more complete, right? Ever. So either be about it or shut up.
So talking about being about it, okay? One of the things I love about you is that this isn't something that you just talk about. Like, you gave a really great lecture, and a lot of people went away challenged and are better because of it. And but it's not just something you talk about, but it's something that you definitely have devoted yourself to. And so talk to me about Proximity Partners. You're the founder of Proximity Partners. So what is Proximity Partners, and what do you want our listeners to know about it?
It's an academic way. If you say the words organizational change strategist,
Okay.
that's what I do.
Okay.
Organizational. People change. Changing those people, strategists. Helping people that are in charge of those people and those organizations strategize ways to do this, right? Sometimes people just don't know where to start.
Yeah.
A lot of pastors don't know how to have the conversation or the language to use, or they need somebody to come alongside them and help guide them through the process.
Yeah.
Some of these things are out of sight, out of mind, man. Pastors got a lot on their plates. Pastors got a lot to do.
Yeah.
And this conversation feels so like a side salad. You know, it's important, but it's not the main thing. Truth be told, I think it's one of the main things.
Yeah.
I think our credibility is at stake because people absolutely are not dumb and people are absolutely not blind.
Yeah.
So what Proximity Partners strives to do is to bring this conversation to the forefront of Christian leaders and to help them bring this to the people that they pastor, that they shepherd. It ought to be, it's like not to step in a hornet's nest, but there should be some evidence of a Christian in a Christian church, right?
We would be known by our fruits.
We should be known by our fruit. You know, it's a weird day when I feel as though I could be, pardon the pun, crucified for saying things that Jesus said and not be labeled some crazy name, right?
Yeah.
So if the fruit is how they will know us, there ought to be fruit. This is not the only fruit, but it is a visible fruit that we can see.
I think we have to remind ourselves too what Jesus said. Jesus said they hated me before they hated you.
Yeah.
Like the gospel, we should live lives that are countercultural, and with it is going to come opposition. And
that's the Romans call, man.
Yeah.
Right. So Paul is in prison, seeing all this stuff, and he's instructing these people to not do this. It is the call to counterculturalism.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So they're separate. Y'all be reconciled.
So practical next steps that church leaders and even future Christian leaders in the college can take to lead their congregations and ministry leaders toward reconciliation. What are some practical next steps? Some simple next steps.
Don't be afraid of the hard conversations.
Okay.
Right. So this sounds cliche, but find somebody that does not think like you, talk like you, believe like you, but are believers, and befriend those jokers.
Yeah.
Having conversations with people that are uniquely different, you'd be surprised what beauty can grow from that.
Yeah.
You know, I love, I was talking to David Dukeson, you know, a friend of SEU, a friend to you and I.
Yeah.
And he is a constant champion for talking across dividing lines.
Yeah.
Right? When it comes to those of us in the church, all those other dividing lines, whether it be politics or perceived race, which there's really no such thing as race, just ethnicity, social status, all of those things have to become secondary to the gospel, the thing that brings us into the house of God together. And if we are not willing to explore, at least explore the possibility of that, for the sake of the kingdom, we ought to do something else, man. Honestly, I believe that every Christian should have this natural burden to be credible before the Father.
So you mentioned David Dukeson.
Yeah.
And so just two more questions and then we'll shut this thing down. This has been a great conversation today, by the way. I appreciate you taking time to come on the show. So I don't know if you remember this. You probably do. But it was post George Floyd, and our church was talking about what to do, and we decided let's do a lecture series event on race and culture.
Yep.
And we SEU Carolina, we sponsored it. We had
wearing the shirt right
Dr.
now.
Lucretia Berry. Hope and Heal. Let's go. I love it. Okay, so we had Dr. Lucretia Berry come in, Dr. David Dukeson. He had just published that work on neighborliness, and then I think you were doing your doctoral study in the process, and I think the timing was impeccable. The fact that you were doing that work at the time society was going through what it was going through, and so that was, let's just say, 5 years ago.
2020.
Okay.
August 2020.
What a year. So fast forward to now. Dude, that's a podcast in itself. It's 2020. So fast forward to now. Okay. You just had a lecture series event here at SEU Carolina. What's changed? What hasn't changed? How do you feel just going on that 5-year journey from then to now? Does your heart break for where the church is? Do you have hope? What's your perspective? Talk to me.
Yes, all of the above.
Yes, and
so I'm currently writing a piece, and the first statement is, I love the church. I do. I love the church. I love what she has endured. I love that she is the bride of Christ. I love God's purpose for the church in this age, and how God has purpose to use the church as a vessel, a vehicle, to bring as many people home with us as possible. I dislike that. I don't believe that all of us inside the church know that we are the vehicle to bring as many people home with us. I dislike some of the things that we bring home with us. I dislike some of our decoration, some of the things that adorn the church. But that doesn't cause me to dislike or to not love the church. It causes me grief because I feel as though in many ways the church is veering from mission, right? But it's not the first time. It won't be the last time.
Yeah.
I just believe that it's incumbent upon men and women that are called to its care.
Yeah.
To be careful about the citizenship that we create.
Yeah.
And we have to be careful with what we bring and what we say and what we pass off as God said, as the gospel. A lot of things have changed since 2020.
Yeah.
And so the divide in the church has grown, right? So churches have lost members and folks that don't look like the majority culture in the church, right? And that's gone away by the droves. And so some people called it the what was it? It was a movement. So it wasn't like Brexit. It wasn't like that, but it was the walk away or something loud or leave loud.
Okay.
And there was a movement of folks that were leaving their churches because leadership was either not attuned to social issues that affected the people in the congregations. And those issues became very, very loud for a lot of people. So since we have allowed things in society like George Floyd and other social unrest to not only be carried with us, but also to define us. And also on the other end as clear points of demarcation that we don't want to talk about that here, right? Some people left and feel unloved by the churches that they loved. Some people left and feel betrayed by those they called brothers and sisters for years. And so there's a lot of hurt that I have seen and counseled folks through and been witness to, just lots of stuff. But I have hope on the other end. I have hope.
That was my next question.
Right. I have hope because the same God who parted the Red Sea for Moses and the children of Israel to walk across dry land in this insurmountable, didn't look like there was any hope. Yeah. And all of a sudden God creates a way where there's no way. Yeah. Man, I'm ever hopeful because I firmly believe that God is raising up people with voices, hopefully like mine, that care for the church and care for the church's proliferation long after all of us have passed on. Right. The church is worth it. Christ's message of redemption is worth it.
Yeah.
And so all the other stuff that bombards the church is not going to go anywhere, right?
Yeah.
This isn't the first time the church has been hit.
No.
It won't be the last time the church is hit.
Yeah.
But there's always a remnant. There's always witnesses willing to rise up to say, nah, man, not on my watch. The church is worth it. Let's push through for the sake of the glory of God.
Yeah.
We may have different ideas as to how to best declare the lordship of Jesus Christ, but we are committed to that goal. We are committed to that aim, and we're going to do that thing, right?
Amen.
It's,
I'm hopeful too. I'm hopeful because on this 5-year journey, at least since SEU Carolina has become part of the conversation, we're still having the conversation, and we're still talking about it, and we're having these conversations in front of the next generation to challenge them and to spur them on, and to be Christ-centered and to have that biblical worldview. Good. Last question as we close this out: is there anything that what's one takeaway that you hope the students walked away with from your lecture?
There's always work to be done, man. Right. Mm-hmm. This is just the area that God has called me to.
Yeah.
Right. To some people he calls to India on a mission field. To some people he calls to a food pantry. To some people he calls them to preach the gospel on a pulpit in front of thousands each week.
Yeah.
To some people he says, hey, y'all, there's some stuff that's hitting the church and it ought not hit the church. And we really need to be dedicated, committed to Christ's message for the sake of the gospel, and nothing else really matters. It's like if we can focus on that and allow all this other stuff that's out here, that we're always going to have loud voices from the world. Yeah. Always. But the message of the cross, him crucified, resurrected, his love for us, and his desire for nations to be brought home with us has to be louder than a lot of other stuff. I want groups. I do. I want affinity and barbecues. I want all that. Yeah. I want the gospel preached on Sunday. Yeah. But I want the church to be credible. I want us to survive the world that we're in. Yeah. Right? I want us to carry on for generations long after you and I are no longer breathing. Yeah. And I want us to carry on for the sake of God's glory. But there has to be somebody that's committed to its care and its cultivation for the future. Well, I definitely think, Corey, that is something that God has called you to. I'm proud that you're one of the professors that we have here at SEU Carolina. It was great to have you on campus to do that lecture, and you've actually been busy. Your latest work, what is it? You're now publishing with Christianity Today. You're doing some writing with them on discipleship. Yeah. So tell me about that, because that was like a series, and just before we go, because I feel like our listeners need a practical next step, and I feel like reading some of these articles that you're publishing now today in this moment. Yeah. After this work that you've done is very prevalent. So how could they find these articles? Where are these articles? Talk to me. So on Christianity Today, under the pastors section, there's multiple sections. There's discipleship in a changing world, right? Okay. Just addressing how pastors, Christian leaders, can practically address these things in their congregations. What some trends that we're seeing. Yeah. How we can address those trends, and how we can reverse a lot of the courses that we see, specifically young people and those that are coming into the faith stage for the first time. How can we help them proliferate a credible witness? Well, you've heard it right here, folks. Check out Christianity Today for some of Corey's latest work on the subject. Thanks so much for coming in and being on the show today. And thanks for the work that you're doing. I feel like the work that you're doing with Christianity Today, that's no small feat. And I feel like that is an affirmation that you're doing what you need to be doing. And you're talking about what you need to be talking about. So keep talking about it and keep being about it.